Hello, AIMHO. This is Shadeen Say from the AIMHO 365 Committee, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar, a show roundtable discussion on drug and alcohol response on college campuses. Today we'll be discussing how housing programs are working to prevent drug and alcohol use, enforcing policy, determining sanctions, and managing intoxication transports. Shows from around the region have provided demographic information from their campuses on this topic that we'll be sharing with you all today. Followed by hearing from shows from Montana State University, Carroll College, and Arizona State University. Additionally, we will open the floor to questions and answers from the participating schools today. This is the first for the AIMHO 365 group this year using a roundtable format as part of the webinar, so we appreciate everyone's participation and patience in advance as we learn together. We'll be using the chat and question feature for this webinar. To test the chat and question feature, please type in your name and institution so we know who has joined us today. Corinne Fagenstrom from AIMHO 365 will be moderating for us today. Again, thank you for joining us. Corinne, we're all yours.
Corinne, this is Jeff. Corinne is out on a phone call. She's just coming back in the office. So, Corinne, you are up.
Perfect. So, a little bit about today's format. We have a few people that we've kind of shoulder tapped to kind of give a brief introduction to just kind of the approach to drugs and alcohol and their campus environments. And we know full well that AIMHO has a lot of different campus environments within our region. And so to start us off, I'm going to have Jeff kind of talk about some of the trends we've been seeing on our campus here at MSU. You can see from the survey results, we have about 5,000 people on campus as far as who we house, and Jeff can kind of talk about some of the changes that we've made and our approach to holding those students accountable.
Sure. Thanks, Corinne, and Shadeen, and for everyone that joined the call. This is a topic that, we often spend some time talking or discussing at the annual meeting and often run out of time. But I guess at MSU here, one of the things that we're trying to do is always be diligent in evaluating how we approach drugs and alcohol through education, enforcement, programming, and just working with our community partners. And recently, when we published our annual statistics, I guess one thing that could be unique is we saw an increase, and we saw that as a positive thing, just that it represented our commitment to enforcing on campus in the residence halls and then off campus. And our chief of police, I think, was pretty clear and vocal as he talked about our statistics, that he wanted to work, in partnership with the Dean of Students to make sure that there was increased enforcement at campus events, concerts, sporting events, and so forth, is kind of a missing piece of establishing the tone that we wanted on campus. We're seeing a reduction in repeat offenses on campus and off campus, along with stricter enforcement from the university police. Really, our enforcement hasn't changed in 20 years. If we see alcohol, we dump it. Students go to a class. Marijuana, we call in the police. That approach has remained fairly consistent. But the sanctions and their status as a student, both on and off campus, it is, I would say we're more conservative with sanctioning, and that we're also being clear with the messaging in terms of what we expect from students. And so I know that this is something that we've really focused on for the last 2 years. A couple of years ago, I think there was a misunderstanding or a miscommunication that we had a 3 strikes policy, and that's how it was being touted, which seemed a bit rigid, inflexible, and unique. But we're kind of leveling out into something that seems to work for us at MSU. And so that, as we compare ourselves and benchmark ourselves to others, that's why we're very interested in being here as part of this discussion.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Is Mo Ward out there? Mo, can you raise your hand? I'm trying to look and see if our other presenters have joined us. In the meantime, Shadeen, do you want to kind of talk about your approach at Rocky?
Yeah, absolutely. So here at Rocky Mountain College, like most campuses, a majority of our drug and alcohol policies violations occur in the housing facilities. So most often it is our RAs who are identifying that there's a policy violation and approaching it. Students who are found in violation of our drug or our alcohol policy are assessed or assigned to take an online course that does have a fee of $45 this year. The students are responsible of making payment directly to the online program for payment of that course, and then they have to turn in their results to their assigned conduct officer. So whether that be a student conduct board or a professional conduct officer who heard the case, they need to turn those into them to ensure that they got that completed and they got it completed in a timely manner. Additionally, other students who are in the room, so maybe not the owner or the renter of the room, like we like to say, they also can be found responsible for a drug or alcohol policy violation for their presence of it, since it's really difficult, at least on our campus, to determine at times who is actually drinking, who is actually smoking marijuana, so on and so forth. Once we get to second and third fences, our sanctioning goes up from there. Like most campuses, they may be meeting with their area coordinator or myself. We add some probation to it. We also have incorporated an assessment with our on-campus counselor talking about substance use and abuse at a higher level. Does that help answer the question, Corinne?
Absolutely. And it looks like Maureen is joining us. We're just trying to get our audio figured out. While we're waiting for that, are there questions that are out there or questions that anybody wanted to chat about?
I have one question. Shading, this is Jeff again at MSU. One of the things that I didn't mention and the concern I had when we changed our sanctioning matrix was because of our occupancy and we don't have a lot of flexibility right now in terms of room reassignment. A shift for us 2 years ago, or I guess it would have been last year, is on a student's third alcohol offense. Often, in the past, we would relocate them to another hall, and we really were moving past deferred relocation to directly to suspension. So I was worried about the position that would place RAs in when they were, as a result of the third documentation, students were being suspended. So I guess the question I would have is, does anybody else have that same sanctioning matrix, or does anybody have any comment on that approach?
So if participants want to use the question or the chat feature to respond to Jeff Bondy's question, then we can share that with everybody today. It looks like one school has shared that they removed students from campus housing on their third violation of alcohol. I can't quite see who that is from. So if that is your school, can you please add that to the chat?
And Shading, is there a way for you to activate their so they can use their audio?
That's a very good question. I do not know.
So Mary, Mary's asking to repeat the question. Mary, the question was, do any other schools move straight to suspension versus housing relocation? And that's a shift that we made at Montana State last year at the recommendation of the Dean of Students. Because we're at capacity, we didn't have a lot of room flexibility, and so on a student's often their third alcohol write-up, or their third drug, sometimes second drug, we went right to suspension versus removal from campus. And, initially had some concerns about the position that would put the RAs in, because often, that was a good sanction and a good piece of reflection where students had to move off campus, but we've lost that. And honestly, I'm not seeing a lot of pushback from our students. We are also seeing a reduction in repeat offenses. So I was just curious if anybody else has adopted that or had a similar sanctioning matrix.
Can you hear me?
It does look like Mo. Yep. Is that you, Mo?
Hey, I'm here.
Yes.
It's Mo. And I apologize, I've missed some of the audio. So I know Jeff and Shadeen have both kind of shared the structure. Is that what I'm sharing here for the first part?
Yeah, if you just want to kind of talk about your approach to drugs and alcohol at Carroll, any trends that you're noticing or anything that your staff is working to address or modify, that would be awesome.
Sure. Well, and, since you MSU folks are on the call, having come from 3 years in Roski, Carroll College is very tame. But we have a pretty strict policy, I think, and we don't see a lot of repeat offenders, especially for drugs, and very rarely do we have to execute on a suspension. But so for alcohol, it's not a 3 strikes you're out, but it does tend to look a little bit like that. A first-time alcohol would be our standard sanctioning that includes basically a class, community service, and a reflection paper. If you get a second-time alcohol, it would probably result in probation, and then a third-time alcohol would probably result, because we have a 2-year live-on requirement, we don't evict. It's just not something that we have it in our policy or as one of the potential sanctions, but if you get evicted, that generally means you're suspended from the institution. And so usually we pursue a semester or a year-long suspension if you get a third-time alcohol. With marijuana, it's usually more of a 2-step, and you're out again. It's not exactly cut and dry, but usually on a first-time marijuana, if it's a normal, like personal use, normal disturbance kind of write-up, you're going to go on probation, you're going to take a class, community service, reflection paper, and if you get found in violation basically of any other policy at that point, it's going to be a recommendation for suspension. Most of our conduct is actually handled through, we call them informal meetings. Very rarely do we actually go to a full board hearing, which would include faculty, staff, and students in a judicial board type setting. So it's kind of like a plea agreement. So most of our students come in, meet with a conduct officer, and come to an agreement. And so we usually have an opportunity to have some educational conversations and add some sanctioning in that maybe is more individualized to a specific student, but those are typically the results that will go for everybody. We haven't honestly had a huge problem with marijuana in our residence halls. I think last year we had 3 or 4 total marijuana write-ups, but we also don't have a police department, so we are still handling those on our own unless we see product that would indicate like excessive use or potential dealing. If it's normal, like a small amount of product and paraphernalia, we usually just dispose of it and write them up, just like we would for an alcohol write-up. And because and honestly, that's just because Helena Police often takes so long to respond that we don't have an opportunity to continue with the write-up. So if we have any indications of harder drugs than marijuana or distribution, we do work with the Missouri River Drug Task Force or Helena Police to pursue charges on those cases, and then those are usually, concurrent on-campus plus legal charges as well.
Great. Thanks, Mo. Are there questions out there or things that you all are struggling with or or basically why did you want to attend this webinar, and what kind of information can we share with this small group that would make everything helpful? You want to type a question or indicate somehow of a topic that you'd like to discuss, that would be great.
Looks like Mitch has one in New Mexico. Hi, Mitch. The question from New Mexico Tech: what consequences, if any, for students you find grossly intoxicated passed out? Currently at New Mexico Tech, it is not against school policy to be intoxicated. We recently, actually, and this was led by our Associated Students of MSU, adopted a medical amnesty policy, whereas if students call and seek, assistance from the police or our staff for a friend or themselves, we ask them to go to the alcohol and education class, but their conduct record isn't impacted. We do communicate with their parents, unless the situation requires that we don't do that. We consider that an emergency where the dean of students will often contact their parents just to let them know about what occurred. And at that point, I'm sure, like many, our approach is educational, and one out of concern, we want to make sure that the RD is using that as an opportunity to connect with them and establish rapport so that they can follow up. They'll also go through our first two levels of our alcohol education class, and the second being an individual evaluation with the director of our drug and alcohol education program. And in terms of students coming back, if we see somebody who's intoxicated, they're swaying back and forth, or they're within a reasonable person's mind, we can tell that they're intoxicated. We do ask them to contact our staff. I guess we manage that situation if they're at risk to themselves or others. We may contact the police. We may, write them up for an alcohol violation, but our priority is not to sit at the door and wait for people to come back, and we just don't have the resources to do that. But if their behavior is brought, to our attention that they've been drinking, we do get involved. Corinne, anything else to?
No, I think you pretty much covered it. It looks like we have some other questions coming in, though. Mary is wondering if anybody does restorative meetings or circles for alcohol, drug violations, especially when the community is impacted. They're looking at adopting this kind of response for her staff when it's appropriate, and wondering if anybody else has resources out there, if anybody else is doing that. We're not.
No, we haven't done that, Mary. We're trying to improve at the development of our community living agreements and being more intentional and dedicating more time and resources to the development of community standards, and then using that as a guide to potentially bring it back to the community. But we haven't, I guess, been restorative in the sense of when we recognize that harm to, and you have someone that's willing to step forward and that there's been that impact. I think there's potential there. Just haven't given that the restorative piece the time and I think the attention that it needs. However, we do have a commitment as we manage conduct, under the auspice of the Dean of Students. I think they're open to that approach, again, when it makes sense. But in terms of also, I'm trying to think of anything else that would contribute. But I guess that's one that as we look through, the book Reframing Campus Conflict, that's a discussion we're beginning here at MSU. But it's just, when does it make sense? And I think in every aspect, as we look at drugs and alcohol, we want to get to the root and work with the individuals and get back to the learning that can occur between the student and our staff, the relationships that we want to build with them. And I think students know about the policies. They are clear about the outcomes. We want to find better ways to get students to reflect on why and or if, without getting into the realm of being alcohol educators. What can we do to help students and reward them when they make positive changes and they do the right thing?
Looks like Tyler from MSCB also has a question about who teaches group classes. At our institution at MSC, we're really fortunate to have a great partnership with our Office of Health Advancement, and we work with them who run our Insight program, which is our drug and alcohol seminar program. And so they have a licensed drug and alcohol addictions counselor. They also work with students and peer mentors to really facilitate those group classes.
And this is
For a
Carroll
while.
College again. We also, sorry.
Go ahead.
We also facilitate all of our wellness classes through our counseling center. So it's our licensed counselors that are doing those classes, and the students do get charged for those. There's a fee attached to the course materials, and then we also charge them for the time. So that's another thing that ends up on their account because of the class.
Yeah. For some time, students who were cited for possession of dangerous drugs or an alcohol violation off campus, they actually went through the, I think it was with the county, their Drug and Alcohol Assistance Center, and now they can actually receive that. They can take their classes here. But in all of this, we've been, we wanted to make. I think we wanted to make some changes, and we did want to increase the accountability here at MSU. Part of that was really educating students about the policy. I guess the discussion that we are, now focusing on is how can we, what can we do more, and how can we follow up? One, to make sure that students are okay. How can we use positive feedback when they are doing exactly what they set out to do, and just really focus more on the learning. And so I think that's, now that we have more time to do that, I think students have responded well. I think the campus climate is more positive, and it's improved. Now how can we get out and advocate and help students, continue to set or make positive changes that we've asked them to make, or I guess that they've agreed to make.
Hi, this is Brent from Grand Canyon University. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, yeah. So I was trying to finally get on in here and listen, and so I'm the one that said something about like our drug stuff. And so we have about 17,000 students here on campus now. About 5,000 commuters and 12,000 on campus. So there's been a lot of changes for us, but I wanted to speak into our one of our drug policy here, which has been a little bit more effective probably the last year. So we recently have Grand Canyon University Police that have been active since probably the last part of spring of last year into the summer, and now we're full-fledged. And so one of the biggest pieces that we've discovered is that any kind of drug possession charges here on campus, whether it be just dust in a grinder maybe, they're submitting charges to Maricopa County Prosecutor's Office. And so we found out last September, basically, when a student called myself that said that they got this letter from the county attorney's office. And so now we have both, not only a student conduct side, but we also have a legal side. So in the state of Arizona, which Grand Canyon is located, it's a Class 6 felony. So they'll complete their sanctioning process with us, but then we'll get a letter anywhere from 6 months to a year, as far as a year and a half out, that will say you've been charged with a Class 6 felony, and there's an opportunity for pick option 1, and it'll go on your record. But option 2, you go through a diversion program. And so there's probably been a fairly long list of students that have had to go through this diversion program. Basically, it's a urinalysis, and they got to do that for about 3 or 4 months. They got to pee clean for 3 or 4 months, and it's about $1,000 to $1,500 for them to complete that. So that's something that's been added to our list of stuff as outcomes for students with possession of drugs here on campus.
Yeah, we, with our officers are sworn officers. Our students, they go through the city court, and they walk away with about $1,000 worth of fines, and still, students, and we've had a number of students, probably 30 students this year that have been cited. Some of them just don't think they're going to get caught, or they don't care. But I would say it's manageable at this point. But there was a period where we didn't always call the police in, and now we call them in every time. for
Yeah, that's
when we
good.
suspect. And I want to go back to Mary's question about the restorative circles. One of the things that we found is kind of a hybrid with is, and I mentioned that we want to improve in how we manage community standards, is using a community standards board to provide input to our conduct officers, just on the tone of the halls. How are we doing? Do we need to be more, do we need to think about what should we be thinking about when we develop sanctions for our students? Do they have any feedback that we could share with students when we're meeting with them individually? And I think that is in response to trying to partner with our students where it doesn't always feel like it's through enforcement and rules, but we're actually working with them to promote an environment that they're asking for. And so that is, I think that's another area for us to move forward in, is if we don't have, a clear victim and or a person that's willing to step forward and accept responsibility, can we use that, not necessarily a hearing board, but can we use that advisory panel to guide us, in a very clear way that we're partnering and working with our students?
So Shadeen was just letting me know that if anybody's interested in seeing the questions that are popping up or the chats that are going on from a panelist point of view, she sent you a link to re-log into the webinar to be able to act as a panelist, which should give you the opportunity to at least see the questions that are coming in and potentially participate with audio as well. So if you're interested in doing that, we know that some of you might leave for a brief moment and come back. Are there other questions out there or anything, other topics that we want to address?
Corinne, something that we've talked about, and I'm not sure, who all can access the audio, but if you can find a way to do that, I would be curious about what you were all experiencing or seeing with students, smoking marijuana in the buildings that are not complying, either through they're not answering their door, not allowing officers or staff members to search their rooms. Every year, I think it's on, I don't know which day it is, we have a number of campus organizations that really work to inform students on how to not comply, I guess. And but we haven't seen, so far, I think students usually do the right thing, in terms of being cooperative. If not, we can still handle it through conduct. But are any of you recognizing any patterns or experiencing this on your campus?
At Grand Canyon, we part of living here on campus, because it's a privilege to live here on campus and it's not a right, as a lot of students are finding out as we kind of progress forward. Part of what they agree to live on campus is they can have their room searched, their personal stuff searched, their vehicle searched at any point in time. There doesn't have to be justable cause. So we work pretty closely with public safety. Public safety, I think there's probably about 160 something security, and then there's 24, 25 sworn officers, but they have the ability to pretty much inspect or do room searches at any time that they would anytime that they want. So that's part of the students' agreement to live here on campus. So that's how we get through. Will they allow you or will they not allow you? They basically have the ability to do that here on our campus.
Thanks. Yeah, Corinne just asked about medical marijuana, and I guess more of a comment that, is some of our, our feeder states in terms of non-resident students, many of them have legalized, personal use, and or we also have medical marijuana. You can get a medical marijuana card in Montana, but, we don't, it seems like we surprise students each year when we let them know that they can't have it in the residence halls, regardless of whether or not they have a card. And so I think that is another way. That's another lens in which we need to look at how we inform students, at orientation and at first floor meetings and prior to that, so that we're all on the same page.
It does look like we've had some other panelists join us who should be able to speak. If you can speak and would like to give kind of a brief overview of your approach at your institution, that would be amazing. Are there any other topics out there? I know another one that tends to come up too is how do you train student staff or professional staff on responding to drugs and alcohol or adjudicating conduct? If there's anything topic-wise out there that we want to discuss, that would also be a possibility.
Hey, this is Mo over at Carroll. I guess I'll just, for smaller schools or schools that don't have police departments, you know, it was stuff like working at two larger schools where we had good relationships with police departments, and then coming here was just like a big shift. And not that we don't have a good relationship, it's just, again, we're not at the top of their priority list. They don't have a 90-second response time like I was used to. So I think, again, it's been difficult for us to manage. We've had to have lots of campus conversations about, like, you know, what is the priority of getting the behavior to stop versus, you know, involving police. And I don't know, like, again, I don't think those decisions can be made in a bubble. I definitely encourage you to talk to more offices on your campus and even people who like work with liability and contracts before you make any shifts in how you process incident reports or how you approach conduct situations. But yeah, we do still primarily handle it in-house, which is a blessing and a curse. But I do think it gives us that opportunity to have those conversations. But the one thing that I really try to instill, especially with the student staff, is that if they ever feel uncomfortable or feel like it's something that they can't handle, I want them to call someone, whether it's senior staff or calling Helena Police and getting them rolling. Like, they're never going to be in trouble for calling up. And again, I think kind of going back to one of Jeff's points earlier, like, you know, if it is their second time or their third time or whatever, and there's a possibility that student's going to face more severe sanctions, I think that sometimes that weight really rests on the student staff's shoulders of, like, or on our campus, a lot of our students are scholarship athletes, and if they get written up once, sometimes they will lose their scholarships. So that's another one that we have to deal with. So I think just allowing them to remove themselves from being the bad guys so that they can continue to be the community developer, and getting the higher level staff or police in to handle the situation when they need to. You know, not that they get a pass from conduct enforcement, but I just think giving them that opportunity to call up and really ask for help when they need it has been something that we, I think, have really had to hit harder here than even what I've seen at other institutions, so that they don't have that weight on their shoulders.
This is Brent from GCU. I had a question with the people that are listening. So what constitutes, for some of you, it sounds like you guys have like informal student conduct officer meetings versus more formal hearings. Where's the cutoff for you? Which students or incidents would go to a formal hearing versus something that you adjudicate more in an informal student conduct officer meeting? Anybody information with that?
I think we always
Again,
at MSU. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I think we always offer the
Okay.
student the opportunity, you know,
Yeah.
to take responsibility. Usually, when a student's at their, you know, at the end where it's pretty clear that we're going to offer suspension, you know, even at that, usually we don't suspend. You know, when it is a suspendable, potentially a case. We will refer that up to the Dean of Students will hear that for us. It creates some separation between us, and I think that makes sense. But believe it, and I think I continue to be surprised at the number of students, even when it's suspension, we'll go ahead and sign the agreement. But I would say, that's when students start to contest, when they have nothing to lose by going to a hearing. But we don't have many hearings.
Yeah, and this is obviously we're much smaller. We're only about 1,200 students with 800-ish on campus, but 99% plus of our cases are held in what we would call an informal meeting, which is just what Jeff was describing. It's sort of that initial meeting to really talk through the process and talk through the incident report with the student. And in our process, really, we oftentimes leave it up to the student. If they want to go to a hearing, that's really what triggers us to get that moving. There's only been one case that I've had in 5 years that I sent to a hearing regardless of whatever the student wanted, because he was not participating in the process, and we just weren't going to deal with it in the informal side anymore. So I would say those are usually, it's the cases like Jeff said, it's the ones that have everything to lose and really feel like there might not be a preponderance of evidence. But we usually only go to a hearing if we feel like, as an institution, we do. And so I think in 5 years that I've been here, we've literally only had 3 student conduct boards. So
Wow.
the majority of our cases are all held informally, and that basically means we have to come to a mutual consent, is what it's called in our code of conduct. And that's for actual college policies. If it's a candle, we actually don't, by our code, we don't even have to meet with them. We can just basically send them a letter saying, you had a candle in your room, and here's the result. We don't do that very often, but we can. But for alcohol, drugs, some of those higher level ones, it's always a meeting, and it's almost always handled informally.
Okay. So like here would be.
I will.
Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
As we've gone to it's a more conservative sanctioning matrix, that it requires our student staff to be more detailed in their reports and to make sure that they're accurate. It also, I think, allows our professional staff and our RDs, when they're meeting with students in first and level, you have to give them some benefit of the doubt, where it's not a court of law, and you have to ask really good questions. And what I don't want to see is us become so assumptive in our adjudication and management of those that it's going to put us at odds with students. And someone had asked, is with our schools that have gone to tougher sanctioning, do we worry about under enforcement? And I didn't worry as much about under enforcement as I did about RAs just not even, look, I don't want this job. This is just not for me. I don't want to knock on a student's door and have the result of that interaction be a $36,000 penalty because they're getting suspended, or whatever a semester's worth. And so that has motivated us to be more effective at levels. First of all, day one and at orientation, when we're communicating expectations, when we're communicating how we're going to enforce consistently and setting the presence. I think it's prompted us and required that we be more focused. We did have to build in several layers of assessment in town hall meetings. We have a resident satisfaction survey, and RA, we survey our residents twice about the performance of the RA, just to make sure that we don't have any communities that are unattended to, because their RAs aren't doing their job. And we're also very clear with the RAs about that part of the expectation, as I'm sure that you all are. But we're like I say, we're seeing a huge decline in repeat offenses. But I also see a high level of resident satisfaction in the academic environments and how their staff enforces, and that they're doing their job. Usually we hear about it more from parents and students if the RAs are not doing their job versus over enforcing. So I think we've got a nice balance. That has, but not the enforcement without the educational piece, in terms of letting them know what they're expected to do, and then also helping them if we recognize they have a problem. We have to be better at that. And I would say that's an area where we want to continue to be diligent and never settle, is making sure that when we see a student in trouble, that we're doing everything we can to get them some help, and or reflecting on their behavior before it becomes a pattern. And our motivation is so that no one gets suspended or no one gets evicted. And I think that's a good thing.
Are there any other questions out there or topics that we want to discuss? Jadine, it looks like you had a response back to a New Mexico Tech question about students being intoxicated and enforcement of policy in that realm. Did you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So New Mexico Tech posed a question regarding, if I understood their question correctly, it was their policy doesn't prohibit students from being intoxicated in their halls. The policy at Rocky Mountain College is very similar to that. There's nothing against a student being intoxicated under drugs or alcohol in the halls. It's their behavior as a result of it that could find themselves in some trouble or some follow-up needed. Any student, though, that we deem, and so the housing staff deems, that they may need some medical attention, so they're intoxicated or under the influence to a level that we are uncomfortable with, and we caution our RAs that they should always be uncomfortable with somebody being intoxicated under drug or alcohol because they don't know where they're at in that process. They are required to call our local ambulance, and our ambulance crew then makes the determination of if medical treatment is needed. Those students, we required then to meet with our campus counselor to have a private session with her regarding substance use and abuse. And our hope with that is students can become more educated on their use, their limits of their use, and how that is impacting not only their academic life, but their healthy life. And we found that in doing this, we're having fewer students be in our residence halls that are intoxicated. We've also added that any student who violates our drug or alcohol policy, our peer review board, so our student conduct board, has asked that all students review the entire policy handbook so they're aware of the expectations of living on campus, and as part of that, they have to have a meeting with either myself as the director or one of the area coordinators to follow up on any questions regarding policy, where the policies come from, making sure that they fully understand their agreement to living on campus. By doing those things, we've reduced our repeat offenders dramatically because we think that our students are more educated, right? Does that help answer your question, New Mexico Tech?
Okay, we're kind of running up against our time, so is there any other topics out there or questions that are out there that you'd like some input on?
I don't know that we have time today, and it's a little difficult, with this format where everyone can't just, communicate freely. We want to look at that maybe is, when we are together in Phoenix just to talk about, the parental involvement and just some of the things that really, make these drug and alcohol situations much more dynamic and things can develop much more quickly. So I think it would be interesting to see how parental involvement shapes this, and just, trying to manage, address risk management, and just how that seems to change. The dynamic changes every year, so I think we can continue that discussion in Phoenix.
Jadine, do you have anything else to add as we wrap up?
I would just add that, to echo, yes, what Jeff is saying. So for those of you that will be joining us in Phoenix, either at the Show Institute or at the conference, please join us at the Show Forum. Pull any of us aside to continue these conversations. I think it's really important. It's what helps us grow as professionals. It's what helps us help our institutions grow, and it's what helps us do what's right for our students in getting them to persist to graduation in a healthy capacity. So Thank you to Jeff and others who participated in our conversation today and shared their insight, shared their questions, shared their experiences. It was a great conversation. I look forward to visiting with many of you more next month.
Thanks, Shadeen.
Great.
See you if you're able to go. We'll see you in a month.
So again, a big thank you to Jeff and Corinne for helping moderate this webinar for us today. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded, so we will have the recording available on the YouTube channel, which there is a link on the AIMHO 365 page on the AIMHO website. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Corinne or myself, and have a good day, everybody. Goodbye.